What's up, guys? This is Chris with D-Pad Dubs. So, as you know, this channel is run by three guys, me and my roommates/brothers, Colin and Johnny. We just passed 1,000 subscribers this week, and I can't thank you enough for all of your support on our channel these last few months. It means so much to us all. Anyways, I am the tank main of the house, and Winston has always held a very special place in my heart, so I felt it was high time to make a guide for him. Without further ado, let's kick it off.
Oh, forget it. Let's move.
Number 1. When to dive and who. Winston is either a throw pick or a carry hero. It's very rarely in between those two characterizations. The difference between throwing and carrying is typically how good the player's knowledge and skill is at making wise dives. Winston's role as a main tank is to disrupt. What that means is to get in and distract enemy DPS and supports and get kills when you can. Remember this about Winston, your primary job is to disrupt, not to get kills. That said, Winston is incredibly powerful against squishy DPS, specifically against any support or DPS that doesn't have significant CC or escape abilities. Examples of targets you should prioritize are Hanzo, Genji, Ashe, Soldier, Widowmaker, Brigitte, Junkrat, Zenyatta, and Baptiste. Tanks are absolutely your last priority on dives. Let's talk about the art of the dive for a second. When diving the enemy team, you either want to find the high priority squishy target to dive on, or if they are grouped up to a point where diving is unsafe and therefore not an advantage, the best place to dive is in between the tanks and supports. From there, you usually create enough pressure for either the tanks to turn around and deal with you, or completely distract the supports from healing their main tanks, effectively giving your team a huge advantage on the front line. If you're lucky and play it well, you can often get a pick in the backline, but even if you don't, you've made a huge impact on your dive. A huge part about diving as Winston is ensuring that you can get some kind of healing from your own supports as you're engaging with the enemy team. Winston pairs very well with a Mercy or an Ana, as the Mercy can quickly fly to you if you need healing during the dive. The damage boost is nice too for this. And Ana because she can heal you from a distance. If you are paired with an Ana, which is my personal favorite, you absolutely need to make sure that you are in her line of sight while you make your dive. If you must leave for LOS for your dive, at least keep a mental note of where it is so you can quickly withdraw to a position where you can be healed. Another imperative part of diving with Winston is ensuring your abilities are not on cooldown. Whenever possible, engage with the enemy team by safely walking up to them from behind cover so you have your jump pack available to escape. Do not make engagements to die. Good Winstons die very little, but make just as many dives as the Winstons who do. They're just better at playing around cover and jumping out before dying. Having your abilities on cooldown significantly hinders your ability to survive, as it is with most heroes in Overwatch. I'll talk about shield placement in another point, however, this is another important factor in your survivability with Winston. Lastly, dives don't have to be offensive. In fact, there are a lot of times you will need to peel back to your supports or DPS to help them out when they are in a duel or have been dove by an opposing player. Winston's mobility helps them excel at this aspect, and a good Winston can help keep their entire team alive when they need the help. Number 2, master your jumps. Learning the distance you will travel while jumping with Winston is very important to your success with him. Landing on someone with your jump pack does 50 damage and slightly boops them back. However, that initial 50 damage is completely wasted if you don't land on someone with it. Oftentimes, that initial damage is what you're going to need to secure a kill on whoever you're diving. I recommend creating a custom game with your jumps on no cooldown so you can practice jumping around and landing precisely where you want to. It's very boring and repetitive doing this, but it really helps you get a better understanding quickly of how far your jump pack is going to carry you when used. You can always jump pack onto someone after you've engaged them as well. If you need some extra damage to get the kill, just jump on them again. A cool tech with Winston is to back up before you jump to significantly shorten your jump length. Hold S or back on your thumbstick before using your jump to reduce your jump from 18 meters to about 10. This is a huge help for when you're in close quarters with someone and your last 50 damage is going to kill them. The last thing to master with jumping is landing a melee just before you land. The ideal scenario when jumping, use your jump, begin shooting your Tesla cannon once you are in range of the target, and now just before you land, melee them, then immediately begin shooting again. The jump landing cancels the animation of your melee so that 30 melee damage plus the 50 jump pack damage makes your jump do an immediate 80 total damage to whoever you're diving. That is a significant amount. Here's an example in the practice range of time to kill with all three methods. First, using my Tesla cannon, then landing a jump, then using Tesla cannon, And lastly, jumping, using Tesla, getting off a quick melee, landing, and then firing Tesla again. Number 3, Wise Bubbles. Winston's bubble has 700 health, lasts for 9 seconds or until it's destroyed, and is on a 13-second cooldown. Poor bubble usage is the most common mistake when I coach new players on Winston. You really should never dive unless you have your bubble available. It is your number one tool for survival and utility when making your dives. The ideal scenario for bubble usage is as follows. Make your dive, take about 100 to 200 damage, then drop your bubble. Dance in and out of your bubble as you're doing damage to your desired target until they are dead or your jump is off cooldown. If you can secure the kill, basically if no healer has peeled to help them, then stay there until they're dead. In the more likely scenario that you can't secure the kill, as soon as your jump pack is off cooldown, get out, get back to your team, and prepare for your next dive. Now, bubbles don't have to be used on dives. In fact, there are many times that you will need to use your bubble defensively to save your team and mitigate damage. A few examples of this are Diva Bombs, Ulting Pharahs, Junkrat Tires, etc. Your bubble can even block Shatter. I can't count the number of times I've put my bubble over someone that has been put to sleep by an Ana, or over someone's dead body as Mercy prepares them for a safe resurrection. Your bubble is now almost as strong as Orisa's and covers more ground, so don't just use it to make your dives, it can do a lot to save your team. Learn how to shield dance with your bubble ASAP. Many DPS players will switch to Reaper to try and counter you as soon as they realize how much you're dominating their team. Reaper is commonly known as a hard counter to Winston. However, you don't need to switch. In fact, there are many times that I don't switch when they start running a Reaper. There are 3 different things you can do to negate his effect on the battlefield. Number 1, stay as far away from him as physically possible. Number 2, communicate with your team to take him out quickly. And number 3, shield dance effectively. I've killed more than a few Reapers in just one-on-one battles by just shield dancing his shotguns, effectively negating his damage entirely. Number 4, when and where to pick Winston. Winston excels against squishy DPS that don't have CC, like we've already discussed. I typically won't choose Winston if the other team is running a Mei or Orisa. These characters encourage the enemy team to stick together and play more of a brawl, which makes separation kills as Winston pretty difficult, and that's what he excels at. Other characters that make things difficult to play against are Pharah, Torb, and Sombra. Those aren't the rule, and you can play against them, but they do make things difficult. As a rule of thumb, the more spread out the enemy team is, the better Winston is going to get. Now let's talk about your team. Winston obviously pairs very well with a Diva. She can dive targets with you and mitigate a ton of damage from your initial dives. Dive heroes like Sombra, Tracer, and Genji are excellent pairings with you. Ranged DPS also pair very well with dive tanks as you'll be taking so much space and making such a distraction that the ranged DPS can typically pop off while the Reinhardt is turned around and trying to deal with you in their backline. Ranged DPS like Ashe, McCree, Hanzo, and Widow can all pop with the Winston. The ideal healers with Winston are Zenyatta, Mercy, and Ana. Moira, Lucio, and Baptiste are weaker healers to pair with as they lack the ranged healing to help you out while diving. But if you're going to play with them anyways, which is totally fine, you'll need to be smart about taking small damage on your dives, then returning to them for your heals. Brigitte is a mid-tier pick for your healing as you are in range of her armor packs during most dives, but you will miss most of her Inspire healing, which is a big bummer and a huge part of her kit. Alright, moving on to maps and environments that are good for Winston. Anything with a low ceiling and narrow lanes is typically a bad pick for Winston. You need space to make your jumps. Anything that inhibits that is bad. Think of it this way, if it's good for Reinhardt, it's probably not good for Winston. A great example of this is the map Hollywood, specifically on attack. The first point is not that great for Winston as the only entry points are through very narrow chokes. You can play him as there is some high ground that the enemy DPS like to sit on. However, it's risky and you're then forced to go down into a constricted capture point, which opens you up to a lot of damage and doesn't fully utilize your mobility and utility. I would rate point 1 on Hollywood 5 out of 10 for Winston's kit. Now moving on to the second point, this is where Winston can really shine. There is a ton of high ground and space for you to play around with. Winston is a huge threat on the second point. There's also a lot of cover for you to play around while recharging your cooldowns. I rate the second point of Hollywood a 10 out of 10 for playing Winston. Now on to the third point. This is almost always when I'm going to switch to Reinhardt. The ceilings are high enough to jump effectively as Winston, but the lanes are small and it's very easy for the enemy team to peel and help out whoever you choose to dive. Winston can work here, but it's really difficult. For point 3 on Hollywood, I would rate Winston a 3 out of 10. Number 5, playing Winston on defense. Whenever I pick Winston on defense, I can almost always count on someone on my team to question my pick.
Really, dude? Winston on defense?
He doesn't naturally seem like a defensive tank. He's not a slow-moving character with a big old shield that greatly benefits from getting the free space that the team on defense normally gets. But, that said, his mobility is paramount to shutting down the enemy team, no matter what high ground they try to position themselves on. Dive comp on defense is an incredibly viable pick. Typically what I will do is line up around the corner of an initial choke and wait for them to peek. As soon as they do, I'll blast them all with my Tesla cannon until I can't anymore, and then immediately get out. Inevitably, during the attack phase, the enemy team will get split up, and that is your opportunity to strike. I won't spend too long on this point. I just suggest you try it and see how it works. I like it a lot, especially when the map gives you an advantage. An example of good maps to play Winston on defense are Numbani points 1 and 2, and Hanamura both points. That's not the only maps, there's a lot of maps that he's great on. Just give it a try, see how you like it. Thanks so much for watching the video. Please like and subscribe. We're a small channel and trying to grow. As always, thanks for hanging out in the D-pad.
Bye.